Assalamu alaikum, grade 11. How are you? This is our last lesson for this course, inshallah, for this semester. If you remember, last time I gave you homework in the activity book, page 44. So please, if you don't have your activity book and your student book, stop the video now, go get your books and a pen or pencil and come back to me. Okay, so welcome back. Activity book, page 44. You had to do exercise 1 by filling in the blanks from words that we studied in the text. I hope that you took the time to answer this. As you can see, this is the exercise that you have in your activity book, and the answers are as follows. People started written communication through paintings and drawings on cave walls. When the alphabet was invented, it became a lot easier for people to communicate. This writing system was made up of letters and symbols, which represented sounds. Then, when mass media prevailed, it introduced the whole world to newspapers and magazines. However, the blind could not benefit from these forms of communication, and that's when the language of Braille was invented. These are the answers. Number 1, paintings. Number 2, paintings. Number 2, alphabet. Number 3, symbols. Number 4, mass media. Number 5, newspapers. And finally, number 6 is Braille. We stop here with the activity book and we go back to our student book to take our last text, to read the last text that we have for this course. And if you go to page 68, please, page 68 in your student book, we have 3 paragraphs. Let's read the introduction first. It says, look at the headlines of 4 articles. So these are 4 articles that you might read in a newspaper or in a magazine. What do you think the articles have in common? Let's read the headlines first. Headline means the title of the article, the main idea of the article. So we have 4 headlines. And we have 4 paragraphs, and we are going to try and find which headline goes with which paragraph. But before we start, let's read the headlines. Number 1, holiday message is 50 years late. Number 2, from mobile messaging to published book, communication becomes art. Number 3, airmail brings best friends together. Notice airmail is in between quotations. So this might mean that we don't really mean airmail as in the post office. We mean airmail as in a different airmail. We'll see what that means in a minute. Number 4, humans not alone in using sign language. These are the 4 headlines. So what is in common between all of these headlines? One talks about messages, one talks about messages in books, one talks about airmail, and one talks about sign language. I think it is very clear that the 4 headlines have language or communication as the main idea that is in all of these headlines. Communication through message, communication through book, communication through mail, or communication through sign language. All of these are forms of communication. Let's start with the first article, A, paragraph A, and let's see which headline goes with paragraph A. A scientific research project has found that while chimpanzees use at least 66 gestures to communicate with each other. What is the meaning of gesture? Gesture is a word that you have at the end of your activity book, and it is one of the words that you have to know for your exam. As you remember, I sent you the material included in the exam, and I hope that you take a look at it. All the words that are found in your activity book under the heading of Module 5, Unit 7 and Unit 8 are included in your exam. So gesture means a kind of movement or a sign that you do with your face or with your body. That is called a gesture. So a nod of the head is a gesture. A wink of an eye is a gesture. A thumbs up is a gesture. All of these are movements that you do to communicate a certain message. So in this paragraph, it says that chimpanzees can use gestures to communicate. Let's move to the second paragraph in this passage. After researchers had spent time with the animals in Borneo, they studied 120 hours of video they had recorded. They were looking for signs that the animals were using signals to communicate with each other. So they videotaped the animals and they studied 120 hours of videotaping. Can you imagine? And they found out that animals do use signs to communicate. They looked to see if the chimps were looking at each other in order to be sure that the gestures had a purpose, that is, to communicate something. So, did the gestures have a purpose? Did they have an aim or a goal? Yes, they did have a goal. And the goal was to communicate a message, an idea. If the animal didn't respond to the gesture was made over and over again. Over and over again, that means repeated. So the chimps, or this chimps is a short form of chimpanzee. So the chimpanzee repeated the gesture or the sign again and again until there was a response. A response. A response is some kind of reaction from the other chimpanzee that is addressed with the gesture. The results suggest that there is a common system of communication across the species. So, which headline do you think is an appropriate headline for this article? Yes, number 4 is the appropriate headline. Humans not alone in using sign language. So we have sign language for animals as well. Let's move to paragraph B. A postcard sent from Florida has finally reached its destination in England. It had been posted in 1957. Can you imagine? 1957 CE. This postcard had been addressed to someone working at an education center. The building had once been a school. Staff at the education center have been trying to find the addressee. The addressee is the person who the postcard is written for. The card, which appears to have been written by a grandparent, describes a trip to Florida, USA. He wrote that it had rained a bit that day, but it was still hot. A spokesperson for the post office said that the postcard had probably been put back in a post box recently. He said that the mail was never in the sorting office for that length of time. So the post office was declared or announced that this was probably something, not a problem with the post office or the sorting offices in the post office, but that someone reposted this postcard again recently or lately. So what is a good headline for this article? From the headlines on top of the page, you can see number 1 says, holiday message is 50 years late. This is probably the most appropriate headline for this passage. Moving on to passage C. In 2001 CE, a girl called Laura Buxton from Staffordshire, UK, wrote a message with her name and address on a helium-filled balloon. So Laura wrote her name and her address on a balloon, and she then sent it into the air where it disappeared. You know that helium-filled balloons tend to keep on flying higher and higher and drifting into the air. So a few weeks later, the balloon landed nearly 200 kilometers away in southern England. Can you imagine? The balloon had covered a distance of 200 kilometers. Wow. And the man who found it took it to his neighbors, the Buxtons, who had a daughter called Laura. What a coincidence. This is amazing. So the Laura Buxton, who lives in Staffordshire, UK, sent the balloon to another daughter or another girl named Laura Buxton, but who lives in southern England. And they were surprised. Let's see what happens with this family. They were surprised to learn that it was from another girl with the same name. So we have two girls called Laura Buxton. The two girls got in touch with each other and decided to meet and became best friends. So what do you think? Which headline works for this passage? Yes, number 3 works well. Airmail brings best friends together. And you see why we have airmail in between quotations, because it's not like the traditional airmail where you send a letter through the post office and they send it by plane. Here, when they say airmail, they actually mean the balloon flying in the air. That's why the words airmail are in between quotations. Moving on to paragraph D, an artist has kept all her text messages, and after 12 years, she had collected about 100,000 messages. Wow. She kept the first few messages because she enjoyed reading them over again. It was like a personal diary. You know, a diary is a book where you write your memoirs and notes about what happened throughout the day. So this lady considered her messages as a form of a diary. It is also a record of history covering world events. So while this lady was writing messages, she probably mentioned things that were going on in the world at the time. So her messages were not only a personal diary, but they were also a record or a registrar of history and of world events. Just like something very close to what we're living now. If you're writing messages to your friends or something, you might be talking about coronavirus, you might be talking about the quarantine, not being allowed to leave home, and all of that. So that would be a personal memoir, or it's like a personal diary, but you will also include some part of history. These are things that are happening all over the world. Very interesting. So let's move on. Every time a text message arrived, she saved the contents. She wrote them in notebooks. When her phone ran out of space to store them, she eventually filled more than 60 notebooks. So she did not delete her messages. She kept them in her phone, and when her phone memory was full, she started copying her messages on notebooks. And she filled 60 notebooks. Can you imagine? Then she started copying them onto her computer. Finally, what happened? The woman took her collection to a publisher, and the book has now been published and translated into several languages. So she took the notes that she copied on her computer to a publisher. A publisher is a person who publishes books. And she was able to publish her messages in the form of a book. And the book has been very popular because it says here that it's been translated into several languages. That means it is very popular with people. Lots of people want to read what she wrote. So which one do you think is the appropriate heading or headline for this passage? Of course, if you look at the 4 options on the top of the page, you will find option 2 is a good headline for this passage. From mobile messages to published book, communication becomes art. And it is this person's communication, personal communication, that has become art. It has been published as a story in a book. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so now we are finished with this last text, or actually 4 passages, 4 texts for this unit, which is unit 8. And I'm going to ask you to please go with me to your activity book, again, unit 8, page 45. On top of page 45, you will find an exercise. It's activity book, page 45, exercise 5. And you have it here in front of you in the video, and you have it in front of you in the activity book. This is a paragraph that talks about another means of communication. Before we start answering this paragraph together, I want to summarize the main ideas that we discussed in this unit. In unit 8, we were talking about communication, the way we can send and receive messages. And we said that we can communicate with others through language, which is speaking and writing through the alphabet, or we can also use sign language, or we can use braille, or we can use gestures, or we can use, a long time ago, people used to use smoke and drawings and symbols and signals. And all of these are forms of communication. I want you to come out of this unit knowing these different words that we use for communication. Let's do this exercise together. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to leave you to think for a minute, and then I will give you the answers at the end of the video. So the exercise says, complete the following text about sign language with the words from the box. The words are deaf, system, communication, gesture, sign. Before we move on, we know all of these words, we discussed them before, but we haven't said anything about the word deaf. What is the meaning of deaf? Deaf means people who cannot hear. So with braille, we were talking about blind people, people who cannot see. Here we're talking about deaf people. They can see, but they can't hear. Okay, so sign language as we know it today originated in 1755 when a Frenchman, Charles Michel Dulappé, started a school for deaf people in Paris. His form of blank consisted of gestures, hand signs, and finger spelling. The Lappé system was the first example of French blank language. What do you think are 2 words that would fill in the blanks appropriately here? His form of communication. His form of communication consisted of gestures, hand signs, and finger spelling. Number 2, the Lappé system was the first example of French sign language. Okay, moving on. Around the same time in 1778, in Germany, Samuel Henneck was working on a blank to teach deaf people how to read lips. What is a good word for this blank? He was working on a system. Okay, meanwhile, in Britain, Thomas Breadwood opened the first school for the, all of this is about deaf people. So this is a school for the deaf in 1783. At that time, students were using his form of sign language. Later, this became British Sign Language. In 1816, after he had seen people using sign language in Paris, an American, Dr. Golditz, introduced the system in the USA. This combined with various blank that deaf people were still using in the USA at the time formed American Sign Language. So this is combined to what? To gestures. Gestures. 5 is gestures. And I've already prepared the answers to you for you to see them here. So number 1 is communication. Number 2 is sign. Number 3 is system. Number 4 is deaf. And number 5 is gestures. So ladies and gentlemen, I am done with the book and I'm done for this semester. I hope you enjoyed the lessons. As usual, do not hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or comments. I wish you the best of luck, study hard, and take care and stay safe.